to prevent the migration of groundwater, and they're going to pump from behind it. The current plan calls for that as a permanent remedy. There are such options that could possibly be a temporary remedy until they clean out what's behind it. Because right now, the only way that they can capture the groundwater is to create negative pressure behind that wall and pull the groundwater contamination out. And the current plan is to pump into the unforeseeable future.
Back to Brad and Jeannie, I mean, what do you think is a reasonable amount of time to think about when we would have Onondaga Lake back to what it was like, or something near what it was like?
I don't know what a reasonable amount of time is. I'm not a chemist. I don't know about those toxins in there. But whatever time it takes to do it, that's what I believe. Whatever time it takes, instead of just setting a budget and cutting it short and doing a partial cover-up. I don't know how long it would take, but whatever it takes, I feel that it needs to be done. It's a very scary situation. It's a very scary situation that they plan to leave us with. And I mean us, all of us. I'm not talking about just Onondaga Nation. I'm talking about everybody that lives in this whole area. That's all of our responsibility. And it's a danger to all of us. Who knows whatever will happen in the future with maybe somebody will, who knows what will happen. That's just it. It's so scary. It's so toxic. I think that there should not be any timeline. There needs to be a constant cleaning and being aware of what's happened to it. There are still some things leaching into that lake now that they don't want to tell you about. There's all kinds of things that they don't tell you about. I don't know how they're going to stop all this. It's just very scary. So I don't feel like there should be any cutoff time or something, however far we go, and that's it.
So,
Another point, just a point of time. The Onondagas have been here a long time. And as I guess I would say a colonist history is to us recent. So any kind of remedy which, if you just say, okay, from colonists to here, okay, how long was that? Well, that would be recent to us. That's recent background history to us. So we had first contact in around 1613. So that's about a few hundred years. Well, that's recent to us. Us meeting you is recent. Us getting to know and having dialogues with you is recent. We call it polishing the chain, meeting with each other. It's recent history to us. That's our new oral history, I guess you could call it, because our teachings go back further than that. So time's different.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that, the difference in time also. Yesterday we had several of us sitting here, and in the days before I spoke with Robin and I spoke with Jack, what are we going to talk about? So Robin spoke about what she was going to do, and I said, I have to think about it. And then when I had thought about the names, telling you about the names of these places that always had names and still do have the names. So that was part of what I was getting ready to do. And I spent the whole afternoon with my mother, who is my greatest teacher, talking about the names and discussing them. I wanted to be sure I told some of the right names. And it became a very emotional time for me, and I carried that here because that was an example of our oral history. Because in spending the time sitting with my mother and she was relating to me our past history, which goes far beyond a couple hundred years ago. So that I agree with what Brad said, that's a very short time. We also have a very short time left to straighten ourselves out on this earth.
All of the communities along the watershed should treat the creek and the watershed as an ongoing situation. It isn't really about picking an artificial time or an artificial amount of money to be spent and say that this is over. I think that being in sync with the rhythms of the watershed is something that is ongoing. It's constant. And I think we might also think about it in another way, because I'm sure that the municipalities along the watershed are worried about tax rates and budgets and that sort of thing. But I was doing a little quick calculating, for which I actually need a calculator, a couple of days ago, and it occurred to me that there are about 120,000 taxpayers in Onondaga County, and if they each paid about $50 a year to a fund that is only about managing the evolution of the Onondaga watershed, that we would get about $6 million a year. And over the 9 years it takes for Honeywell to do what obviously is going to be phase one of anything, that we would have about $54 million, and which is more than enough to then match state and federal or private donations to continue to manage the system. And I think that there are a lot of things we can think about in terms of municipal services that way. We fight like crazy to get our taxes reduced. We argue that we're overtaxed. We probably ought to pay higher taxes and get better results for it. That would be having a life, collectively. But I think, we can't look at our landscapes as, well, we'll do the right thing for a while, meet some minimum standards, and throw it away. If we aren't engaged in it for the long haul, then maybe we should all sort of get on buses and go to the Sun Belt or wherever we retreat to when we're complaining about the area here. But if we're going to stay here, the watershed can't be just some creek that goes to some lake somewhere over there. It should cause us a lot of pain that you can build a mall that blocks the visual access to the lake, or that you can offer to take the spur of the creek that is part of the barge canal and put your parking against it and block it off, and then use our tax dollars to build a replica of a canal inside. And it doesn't seem to outrage anybody. Nobody seems to be upset about it. And that's probably not really true that nobody's upset about it, but it goes back to, I think, what Chris Amato was saying earlier, that we don't have a reasonable reference point anymore. The absurd is normal, and so we just sort of look in the paper and see that people with a lot of money are doing absurd things, and the rest of us are complaining about our tax rates, and things are disintegrating quickly, and that's problematic. If I can add one other point, the MDA is working hard right now to figure out how to get creative people to come into Syracuse, and I think some of us have tried to make the argument that those people are already here. The question is, do they want to live in the city, or do they want to live along the Onondaga watershed? I think we could keep a lot more of our students that come through the institutions here, but they actually go through their education process and can see that the local municipalities do not share the values that they're learning at ESF or other institutions, and so they flee quickly. And so by having the watershed in the condition it's in, it's symptomatic of the way we treat the rest of the landscape. And people who actually have their antenna up and are really analyzing this, they look at it and say, okay, I'm not going to craft a life here.
If I had no more questions, what would you still want to say?
Well, there's this one thing, I think, and we're building up to that. The Onondagas have challenged us to develop the sense of stewardship. And we probably need not say more than that. We need to develop the collective stewardship to take care of the resource. over the long haul.